candidates are divided into two groups. Before the show, they pull names in a blind drawing to determine the order. First up, our first three candidates are Jennifer Nassour, all the way to the left, or to my right, actually. She's a longtime Boston resident, currently living in Backbay. Jennifer Nassour is an attorney and the CEO of the nonpartisan Women's Representation Coalition, Reflect Us. She served as former chair of the Massachusetts Republican Party. This is her first time running for public office. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello, Callie. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. Next up, Kenzie Bach, lifelong Boston resident and affordable housing expert and community leader. Kenzie Bach is currently the senior advisor for policy and planning at the Boston Housing Authority and the former chair of Boston's Ward 5 Democratic Committee. She served as budget director for Boston City Councilor Asaya B. George. She is also a first-time candidate. Hello, Kenzie.
Thanks so much for having us.
I'm glad to have you. And last but not least, of course, Helene Vincent, a mediator, negotiator, and longtime activist for social and environmental justice and the LGBTQ community. Helene Vincent was formerly the Director of Research and Academic Partnerships at Education First and the youngest president of the Downtown Boston Rotary Club. This is her first time running for public office. Welcome, Helene.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have all of you. As it happens, I took a look at your main issues, or some of the bigger ones that I want to give you a chance to discuss here, and one of them is public school. Actually, all of you and other people may not know there is no public school in your district, and it's an issue for all of you. But I wanted to frame it this way because the State House just released information and made the announcement about the $1.5 billion 7-year education bill that's been months in the making, years in the making, some would say. And the essence of it is that there's more money that will be allocated to public schools, and those with the greatest need will get the most. So I wanted you to think about that, this most recent happening, because sitting on the city council, you each will be having to deal with the resources that come from this bill and what happens in your districts. But I'll start with you, Ellen, because there is no school in your district, but you have very strong feelings about universal pre-K, for example, and public education.
No, I sure do. So I was a public school student for my entire education, so I know how important that is. And my concern in education in Boston is I see a huge gap between the decision makers and the people affected by those decisions. So for an example, I'm a huge proponent of an elected school board. I understand why we had an appointed school board, and it was very important during segregation or desegregation. But right now, we're not having the actual family population of Boston being represented there. And I think that's part of the reason that we haven't yet implemented universal pre-K fully, because the people making those decisions aren't the ones whose lives would be positively changed by universal pre-K. When I am knocking doors all over the city, and in particular in Fenway and in Mission Hill, when I mention the idea of universal pre-K, people's eyes light up. Because that's going to make a huge difference not only for their child, but also for them. That's an extra year where parents, mom and dad, can go back to work sooner and actually move their family up in socioeconomic status.
All right. Kenzie Bach, your feelings about both what this bill could do and also, I know you're a supporter of universal pre-K as well. Yes.
Yes, yeah, very excited about the news about the bill. I've been honored to earn the endorsement of Sonia Chang-Diaz, and I think that bill is just, it's such an example of so many years of hard policy work by folks led by her up at the State House. And to me, one of there's been a couple of ways that I've touched the school budget up till now. One was when I was working for Nisour, looking at a line-by-line level and just seeing the inequities that persist between our different schools and what they're able to offer. And then actually at the Housing Authority, working a lot around how do we support homeless kids. I mean, when you talk about the kids with the greatest needs, somebody for whom school instead of home becomes the home base, just you need so many more resources to make it possible for kids to flourish and learn in that situation. And Boston, unfortunately, is a real hub for that. And so I'm really excited about this news. I absolutely share Ellen's feeling about universal pre-K being, it's one of the things that we know that kids who go to BPS's early ed programs, they're closing the opportunity gap at much higher levels, even by 3rd grade and beyond. So excited to see it roll out universally, and particularly excited because I think in terms of that longing for a school that the district's had for a long time, one of the opportunities to build towards that is suddenly we have to cite a lot more early education seats around the city. So let's put some of those early education classrooms here in the district I think that, the back and forth about if you build it, will they come on a public school in the district, I think the reality is we all see lots of young families that end up moving away, and that if we had early education classrooms for that first year or two, it would be a way to keep them here, to demonstrate the need, and then to move towards a master plan integrated with Build BPS that allows us to have more seats in the district.
Okay. Same question to you, Jennifer, and I know you're the only parent in the in the entire candidate group, so perhaps this even has a more intimate feeling for you.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I have one in high school, one in middle school, and one in elementary school, so it definitely is near and dear to my heart. Like Ellen, I was a public school kid, and I even went to public college. So for me, public education is really important, and I think that we're failing our kids. There is a school in the district, an elementary school in the district, and that's the Tobin over in Mission Hill. And according to parents whose kids have gone through there and go there, number one, it's a level 4 school, which means it's in risk of receivership by the state. But number two, the toilets there are made for pre-K kids. So I think that we need to spend more money on facilities. So in Boston right now, we spend $18,000 per teacher more than we do in the suburban schools, and the suburban schools are flourishing. So we need to figure out how to rework that budget a little bit to make sure that our kids are not going to school with mice, that have, schools that are in good condition, that have facilities that are working for them, number one. Number two, like my fellow colleagues over here, I'm absolutely in favor of universal pre-K. I think that early education is really the way to go. The only way to make sure that kids are getting where they need to go later on in life and through their education is to make sure that our youngest students are being educated. So 3, 4 years old, get them in the classroom and let them start learning at that point. So I think we have a lot that we could be doing and making sure that all of our students throughout the city, and even though we don't have really any except for one elementary school in this neighborhood, make sure that we are making all of our schools good, because we have a lot of kids, especially over here, that want to go to the Elliott School, and that's great, but why aren't all of our schools like the Elliott School?
Let me just quickly ask each of you. I know many of you spoke about wanting to have another school in the district. Is that a sense that you're getting from the folks who live in your district, that they very much want a school?
So yes, I mean, yes, everyone would love a school in the district, but I think, you run up against budgetary concerns, right? So if we have some schools that are failing, to take money away from schools that should have investments in them, in the facilities and in the education of our young students, I don't know if it's budgetarily wise to say, yeah, we're going to take millions of dollars, plus it doesn't come up today. It's going to take 7 to 10 years to get that up. I think that there are many other things that we could look at to start producing some classrooms, micro schools popping up a lot. That's a good, good way to go and something to think about. It would be great. Everyone would love a district school here.
Kenzie?
Yeah, so there's particular data from BPS about the kind of mismatch in the number of kids at that school entrance year in particularly the Upper Backbay and Fenway area versus the number of seats that are within some distance. And I should say, because of the way that they changed the school assignment system a few years ago, most kids in that first year at BPS are going to somewhere relatively close to where they live. And so I think that, as BPS looks at system-wide how we locate seats in the midst of, addressing within a context of the whole capital plan, how we locate seats near where families are in the city. This is not the only part of the city that is experiencing that mismatch, but it is one of them. And I mean, you've got to be, from a budgetary perspective, thinking about what's the best, most cost-effective opportunity. But there are, a group at Fenway, CDC, has looked at the fact that there's some space up in existing BPS facilities there that might be usable. There's the old Winchell School down in the West End, and that what's going to happen to that building is currently up for debate and discussion with MGH and their latest stage.
So
of
it
their
sounds like
master
you're
plan.
saying look at other options potentially.
Basically, well, what I'm saying is that I think that even within budgetary constraints, there may be opportunities in the near future.
All right. Eileen?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think about a lot, and one of the reasons I was motivated to run, is my wife and I are 30 and 34 respectively. And so, everybody's having children. As we discuss whether to do it, one of the issues is, could we live in the city if we did that? So obviously housing is a huge part of that. but so too is the school system. And we feel really strongly about sending our kids to public school, so that's what we would want to do. The problem is a lot of people are moving out because they don't see that as an option. And so what we're seeing, all over Boston is transients, right? So young folks moving in and then moving out, people that are just using the city as an investment property. So there's a lot we have to do in housing, but I think part of it is also having really strong local schools so that people actually want to set down roots. And I see that really heavily in the Backbay, Fenway, and folks in the West End are really clamoring for that as well.
All right. Well, you transition to our next topic which is, it's actually affordable housing, so maybe not. This is something that each of you are being faced with, and I would say that the overarching sentiment seems to be that there's just not a way of, at this moment, of looking strategically, as you said, Jennifer, about how much development and where it should be, and a plan somehow, because there's just a lot that, and people who are living in the district are thinking, what's happening? We're being overtaken, and yet I have no place to live. Yeah,
Yeah, that happens. I mean, I started out living in Charlestown. I lived there for 10 years, and it went from not being the most desirable place to live, and when I moved, it was the most desirable place to live, and see all the building that has gone on. I think that everything is a compromise, and government would work a lot better if we had more compromise, and we put all the stakeholders at the table, and that is our neighborhood associations, our abutters, our builders and developers, and everyone. I mean, we have a beautiful city, and we need to keep the character of our city. We also want to, as Ellen said, we want to keep people here. We don't want people racing out to the suburbs, or even worse, leaving the Commonwealth and moving down to North Carolina.
So do you have a sense that it's too much development?
I don't know if it's, I wouldn't say it's too much development. I think that we need more neighborhood buy-in into all the development that goes on, and make sure that we are making the right decisions. So when we have buildings that are owner unoccupied and they're being rented out as Airbnb, I think that that's a problem, and that is a building management problem, and that is a owner problem, right? So I think that we need to have better laws around that. I think in rental buildings, we have a bunch of them in the West End, that these rental buildings, we've heard from various people in those buildings that the management companies are using open units as Airbnbs because they make more money off of that, which is driving up the cost for other people. So I think that there's other ways to look at it. I think workforce housing is a really good thing. I think micro units are a really good thing. I think we want to make sure that there's enough out there so that way people have a place to live. And look, a 23-year-old doesn't necessarily want a 4,000 square foot condo to live in. 23-year-old is happy with, 400 square feet. And so how can we keep people in the city near their jobs?
All right. Kenzie, you work with the with the housing authority. So what kind of practice eye do you bring to this? And I also know that, interestingly, you teach a course at Harvard called Justice in Housings, and we're talking about affordable housing.
Yes, I'm in this race really because I have a passion about the affordability of the city, and to me it's existential if we lose. The city is meant to be a place for people from all walks of life, and these communities we love have been built up by people of all incomes, and I do think there are cities internationally. I mean, we look at London, Vancouver, San Francisco. We can see what it looks like when you start going down the road of having your housing stock become primarily about investment capital. And I don't think Boston should go down that road. I think there's a bunch of interventions that we can make. I should say, you mentioned my class that I teach at Harvard. It's interesting. I teach it primarily to students who staff the student-run homeless shelters, both Y2Y, which works primarily with LGBT youth, and then Harvard Square Homeless Shelter, which is a more traditional homeless shelter. And these students come into this class saying, we've seen the bottom of our housing system and it doesn't work. This is broken, and shelter alone is not the solution. And I think what we've done, but never at enough scale, is actually what does work is to anchor in place opportunities in our vibrant communities for people from lower incomes to live. And that takes the shape of, historically public housing. And the federal government's backed away from its commitment there, but we still have all of this public housing in Boston that we need to maintain. We've got 40,000 families on the wait list, and it's one of our main resources for housing families out of homelessness. So that's what I've been working on at the BHA, is preserving that, and we got $30 million in the city capital budget for the first time this year for preservation of public housing, which we should be clear is the city stepping up when the federal government's stepping back, which isn't how it should be, but is how it must be.
But a lot of people are really just mad about the luxury housing seeming to suck up everything, and there's
Yes.
no space for affordable housing.
And that's why I think we have to be doing a lot more to look at land trusts, cooperative housing, which actually we have some great flourishing examples of in the Fenway in this district, both with public land and other places where we can say, how do we create housing that's a bit more detached from the speculative market going forward? Because that's, when you ask how have people of more moderate means stayed in some of these neighborhoods that we're running represent, it's through those kinds of programs in the past. And also affordable home ownership opportunities, which is something I've been working on with Maha, and that are some of the best stories that I hear in Mission Hill and elsewhere are people who managed to buy a home in an affordable home ownership program 10 years, 20 years ago. We have to make more of that happen.
Yeah, because you can't find it now, let me just say. Ellen, what do you say?
Yeah, so this is how I got involved in running for office. I never in a million years thought I would, but I live in the Fenway area, and we have all those luxury apartments going up at a time when we have, housing crisis. And so like any good activist, I started going to meetings, to protest with community groups to try to keep our community inclusive and diverse. And we got completely steamrolled by the developers. And to make matters worse, the Boston Planning and Development Authority, BPDA, BRA, just sat there and took notes. They didn't fight for us. And I realized then that, working on the outside of the system wasn't going to be enough. Nobody understood the crisis that we're in. And I've seen the pain of eviction and displacement firsthand. I got my start in activism actually working as a mediator in small claims court between landlords and tenants to help prevent evictions. And I saw that when you get evicted, it destroys your future employment opportunities. You can't get housing. It's totally life-altering. And it's a really real feeling. And so I think that's why we need to stop haggling with developers who think of every percent of affordable housing as a number versus as a real human life. And so that's why I'm advocating for, in the long term, 25% on-site and 30% off-site affordable housing. I also want to revisit the Jim Brooks Stabilization Act that was meant to help protect tenants and which died, but I would love to reintroduce that. And in the short term, we just need to stabilize the housing market before people get pushed out and they're never going to come back. What we can have in Boston is a vibrant community with people of all different stripes and ages and backgrounds. And what I'm afraid is that we're going to have an increasingly speculative market. People are holding their capital here in these investment properties, and everybody else is getting pushed out. And the problem is once we lose that, we can't get it back. And so I know it's so controversial, but I would revisit opening the conversation on rent control in certain markets because I'm terrified about losing that community and not getting it back. And so that's, I'm out here, I'm fighting, and I'm coming in as an outsider and as an advocate because I just see this as so urgent and as so human, and I'm afraid that we're not thinking about it that way.
Okay. Let's move on to traffic, which apparently has bubbled up to be a huge issue in your district, which then, of course, encompasses transportation, and there's more. There are more issues there than just the MBTA and beating up on it, though you're welcome to do so at this table. Ellen, I'll start with you. Let's talk about traffic and transportation in the district and what you want to do to improve that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I think about the most when I'm thinking about running is, again, the huge disconnect between decision makers and those affected. And nowhere to me was this more observant than in the hearings this February to push back on the T increase. And I'm sure you reported on it that you were there and you saw, people from all different backgrounds protesting, and the decision makers who were predominantly white, older, and male. And what I heard them say time and again is the 6% fare increase is no big deal. Nobody will notice it. It's pennies on the dollar. And what I hear when I say that to people in our district, myself included, is BS, to be polite, right? Like, people are outraged. They don't understand that that's what people can spend on groceries or on rent, and now they can't spend it on that anymore. And so we need people who are elected who understand that that's a real thing. And so I think as a city grows and we get more and more people, we need to, A, invest in public transportation. It's an equity issue. It's also a climate justice issue. And we also need to think about how we commute in the city in general, right? So one of the most controversial things that we hear about on the doors every day is bike lanes. I know you ladies hear that all the time too. Bikers hate cars hate bikers, pedestrians hate everybody. And the reason is the system sets them up to fail. They're all kind of, in the same spaces. And so in my mind, we need to take a step back and look at the arteries that are going through our city, where are bikers most likely to commute through, and actually make separated bike lanes. That way the bikes are out of the road and not affecting drivers. They're also off the sidewalks, and they're not, hurting pedestrians, which is super scary. And so to me, we have to look at the whole system, think about pedestrians, think about drivers, think about bikers, and for God's sake, invest in public transportation.
Okay, Kenzie.
Definitely second a lot of what Helene just said. And just, I think when we talk about the public transportation, there's the state level investment in the T. But one of the ways that we can directly on the city council contribute on that front is thinking about rapid bus lanes in the city and making the space in our streets. I mean, I think often about the fact that, the 39 bus runs in the district, and often you can look at a full 39 bus that's stopped in traffic just inching along, and you could zoom out and look 5 blocks up and 5 blocks down Huntington Ave, and there's more people in that bus than there are in the cars, right, for the 10 blocks on either side. And we have to do our transportation planning acknowledging that reality. And I think, that would incentivize people to get on the bus, right? And I think what's interesting, we're gonna have an interesting opportunity. It's, silver lining kind of opportunity, but the T is gonna be doing these major shutdowns of the red and orange line through the fall and winter, which are gonna really affect our commuters. And we can force all the commuters onto buses that then inch through traffic in that way and cause a lot of people to decide to give up on taking the T into work. Or we can say, isn't this a great opportunity to pilot what it would be like to really make those replacement buses run like rapid buses? And, that was the idea and the promise behind the Silver Line. It hasn't yet come to fruition for the parts where it's above ground, but I think, sometimes people say, oh, the MBTA is a state issue. Well, actually, that infrastructure is something that we can directly work on at the city level. I totally agree with bike lanes. We've got to have a joined up system, because a great separated bike lane that then drops you off into a really dangerous intersection is not a solution to anything. It's not a solution for bikers or pedestrians or cars. And we've had a number of really unfortunate fatal crashes in this district, right, along Com Ave, out in Fenway. So it's just not something, we're talking about Vision Zero in the city. It's just not something that we can continue to countenance. And, I think we also this is something that will have to be decided at the state level, but I think from Boston, we need to be talking about the need to look at congestion charging. Yeah. I mean, half the tailpipes
I think that's going to be coming up as a real thing. Yeah.
And half the tailpipes in the city every day are from out of town. And I mean, we have to make it more attractive for people to take public transit as an alternative, but it's got to be part of the conversation. And there's a public health aspect to that too. Yeah, and for the folks in our district. So.
All right, Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, I think having good transportation is really important, and that's something that we have to work on in this district. One of the other issues, though, that I see as someone who is on foot every single day is that we need to do something about our traffic lights and our walk signals, because right over here is a perfect example of an area, and right down there on Dartmouth Street is a perfect example of an area where there is so much traffic and congestion because we have left on, green light, make a left, but it's also a walk sign. And so cars don't go through, people are aggravated, traffic builds up. Over here on Boylston and Dartmouth, that traffic builds up past Exeter Street. Everyone is frustrated. And so if we are able to have more 4-way walk signs where cars have to wait an extra 30 seconds or 60 seconds, pedestrians can get through safely, and then cars can go, it will be a much smoother flow of traffic. I also think that we need more cameras and more police officers throughout the district monitoring our traffic, because we have people who are blocking the so-called box. We have people who are stopping in crosswalks. We have people who, are just really incredibly disrespectful drivers. And what happens is we don't have a shared universe of pedestrians, bicycles, and cars. Everyone wants to have the right of way. And so when you're blocking a crosswalk, there's a bicycle that's going around, there's a pedestrian going around, there's a kid on a scooter going around, there's an elderly person going around. And so we have, as a city, have to do a much better job at managing what is here. So it's great to say we're going to work on transportation, rapid bus lanes, and MBTA, but that's a long-term plan, and we have to work on that. But in the near term, we need to prevent fatalities, which is one of the parts that result in too much traffic and the traffic jams that we have.
Okay, that's my guest, Jennifer Ann Nassour. She, along with Kenzie Bach and Helene Vincent, are all candidates for the District 8 of the Boston City Council, District 8 running for Boston City Council seats. The seat now held by Josh Zakem, he's retiring from that seat. I would like each of you to pick an issue that we've not discussed, one of the big ones that I know in your district, that you think that you could have a unique ability to tweak. Wow, where's my mind?
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, tweak, or outright create. if you were to win. Helene?
So I think, to me, it's a bigger issue of listening first. I think that's really important. A couple of weeks ago, something happened to me that was reported in the Globe. I was knocking doors, door opened, gentleman answered, and at the end of me, us chatting, I asked if I could earn his vote, and he said, "Yeah, if no one more attractive than you comes along." And that's happened to everybody that's been running on this race. You just get kind of disrespected and put down. And so for whatever reason that day, I just didn't want to do it anymore. And I sat in a stairway and I thought to myself, why am I doing this? What's the point? And then what kept coming to me was all of the people in the district and the individual stories, right? The numbers weren't it, but I was thinking about Mary, who's about 5 feet tall and 80-something years old, and for whom 2 high sidewalks that weren't well thought of are called walls for her, because she literally can't get around them. And I'm thinking about Jerry that sat on his front porch every day for 30 years until 1 in the morning watching over his street so that gangs don't take over. And I'm thinking about Monica, who sends her kids to our public school but is terrified because they don't have the appropriate resources that they need for their special needs. And so I was thinking about all of those issues. And I think if we want to take dramatic action in our city to make sure that we are a community, that we are vibrant, and that it's not just a collection of streets, we need to start thinking about this as real stories, real people, and taking their perspectives and their ideas into local government. It's not for me to be an expert and say, I have all the answers. I never could. Everybody has different life experiences. But it's up to me to show up every single day and listen hard. And so I think, not having those hearings at a time when nobody can come is really important. Making sure that we don't just have, coffee hours once a week, 11 a.m. in some random shop. I think that's disrespectful. I think we need every 3 months a big town hall in every district. People can bring whatever questions they have, right? It's not just about me saying, this is the issue I'm focusing on. Only talk to me about this. No, you tell me. What do you care about? And how can I fight for you? How can I use this role as an elected organizer every single day to represent you and bring your voice into local government?
Okay, thank you. Kenzie?
I think, we're running for a city council seat that comes up every 2 years, right? But one of the tricky things is that some of the issues we've talked about today, affordability, education, transportation, and certainly climate change, require long-term thinking, right? Where you can't be just thinking, what are we doing in the next 18 months so that then I can run for re-election? It's got to be, what are we doing that's going to shape the future of the city in 10 years, in 20 and 30? And I think one of the levers on that's really important is how we use public land and public assets. I mean, when I think about whether it's climate resiliency, which, this is an area that if the Charles River Dam were ever to break, much of our district would be flooded. I mean, I think that there's a real opportunity, and we've tried to do it with thinking about the long-term future of public housing, of thinking about how do we take our public land and not just view it as maybe a potential cash cow in the short term, but a real way of serving some of these mission purposes of the city, like siting more affordable housing, creating climate resilient buffers that are parks that people can use, that kind of thing. And that's something I'm really passionate about, is sort of bringing that kind of long-term thinking to the city council. I think also that often when you face those long-term challenges, it's very overwhelming, and it can be easy for us to, get discouraged or fatalistic. And I think one of the key roles, and it relates to what Helene said about being an elected organizer, like one of the key roles for a councillor is to believe in and support the power of collective action. And I really saw that in 2016 with the Community Preservation Act campaign, which a bunch of us just said there is not enough money for affordable housing.
Which we should say you helped create and
yes,
pass.
very involved in that.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of thing, saying, looking at the places where we can't get to the solutions we need on our current course and saying, well, then I think we need to push through some paper walls and change the game. I think that's a really important perspective to bring to the council.
Okay, Jennifer.
So like Helene, for me, it's all about listening. When I was a kid, my dad died of a massive heart attack, and I called 911 and wanted to get an ambulance. I was 10 years old, and the operator said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart, you have to put your mommy on the phone." And so at nearly 48 years old, I feel like I'm really sick of being called sweetheart, and I'm sick of people not listening to me. And so because I know what it's like to be voiceless, I want to listen to other people and help be their voice and be their advocate in public office. And I think everyone needs an advocate. Everyone needs someone who's going to listen to them and who's going to fight for them. And I've had to fight my entire life, whether it was fighting for, where I was when I was a kid and my dad died. My brother had Tourette's syndrome, fighting doctors to pay attention to him in the early 80s when no one knew what it was. My brother was an addict and fighting for him in and out of institutions that he was in, and fighting to get to where I am today. And so I understand everyone has a different perspective, everyone has different life experiences, and I want to be there for all of them.
Okay. I'd like each of you to give me one sentence. I know you're going to make it real long, but one sentence, thank you, which really encapsulates, the essence of who you are and, why you're doing this. No, for the race. This is coming out all wrong. Just so that people have a sense. You all have websites, but this is the time for them to hear from you, how you see yourself in this race and perhaps on the city council. Sure. Later on. Okay, I'm going to start with Mackenzie in the middle.
Curveball.
But with not Mackenzie, Kenzie in the middle.
One sentence. That's not my strength. I'm in the race as a passionate housing advocate, as someone who thinks that everything that we do to make our community better and more vibrant, bring better services, like improve the fabric, only counts if we keep Bostonians in Boston, and really acknowledge that claims of both community and justice require that the people who have made our city so wonderful are part of its future going forward. So I'd say housing advocate and somebody who's I've had experience bringing groups of people together and being part of how do we change a situation, and I think been able to be effective at the city level, and I think we're in such an urgent window on so many fronts, and it's this funny combination of its urgency where we need to act now in the moment, and we also have to act with that long-term lens. So.
Boy, that's a long sentence. That's an interesting one sentence. All right.
Lots of semicolons.
Yes, so many semicolons.
Ellen?
Oh, God, how many can I fit into? So I think can I put three things in there in one long sentence? So the experiences that I've had that I think are most relevant, 3 years ago, I almost died in an ATV accident, bad injuries to my neck, back, and brain, and had to really fight my way back from that. And it took a lot of the fear out of me, realizing what was important and that I wasn't afraid to fight for it. And so when I'm thinking about what I want to do this city council, it's, fight, like we say, with the fierce urgency of now, without fear, with the knowing, what's real in your heart. So the second thing is I'm an out, proud lesbian woman, married. And it's important to me to speak that truth every single day. Because if people don't know that I'm going to speak my truth when I'm talking about me, how can they possibly trust that I'm going to speak the truth when I'm talking about what they're going for? And finally, as a mediator, like everybody's here has said, it's time to listen first. It's time to pay attention, listen, figure out what matters to people, and then bring that.
Okay, Jennifer.
So, also not my strong suit. So, as a member of the sandwich generation, where I have to look forward for my kids and I have to look forward for my mother, I am looking multi-generationally at where our city is and where we should be going and where I'd like to see it be. And so I come in this from a perspective of an attorney who is used to fighting. I am looking at it as a mom who has to teach my kids to ride bikes and watch bicyclists almost mow them down and ride in our public spaces that they shouldn't be riding in. I look at it from a mom who wanted to send their kids to public school, but we don't have that access. I look at it from the perspective of a daughter who watches my aging mother walk slower and slower across the crosswalks and not have enough time. And so for me, I want to be the advocate and I want to be the voice of everyone out there in the district.
The city council is now not where it used to be years ago in terms of makeup. Look at all of you. And also in terms of its power now. For a long time, people said no power. You guys just sit there and sort of, hold the mayor's hand. But that's all changed. Do you feel the weight of that, or do you believe that, first of all, that now the city council is really a different kind of organization and that you would be part of that change?
I think Ayanna Pressley and Michelle Wu really led the way there. I wouldn't have run for the city council 10 years ago. I was 20 years old. But also, it was just, it was a different place. And I think I want to use it as an elected organizer. I think that's the path that they paved. We have to make sure that we're hearing everybody's voices. And no matter who our mayor is, that's just one perspective in one part of the city. We need to work together to represent all our different populations.
Yeah, I agree. I think, definitely part of what's so inspiring about running for this is knowing that you're going to be joining a critical mass of folks who really, want to think seriously about policy in the city. A lot of progressive women. That's an exciting dynamic, and it's something where what I've seen. I was Anissa Sabi-George, one of the at-large counselors, budget director, and she came in her first year. We did this in-depth budget analysis, and she showed up at every one of 33 hearings with all these questions, and everyone said, like, wait, what? That was a lot more detail than we've done before. But then what was interesting was seeing the next year a bunch of other council offices decide to do something similar, and it just taught me how we can just raise our ambitions about what the body can do, and I think it can really rise to meet them.
All right. Jennifer, last word.
Maybe I'm
One word.
Yeah, exactly, and that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm a little bit more cynical because I've been kicking around a little bit longer. But I mean, the city council has the power that it has, and the mayor's office has, by charter, much of the power. I mean, it has the budgetary power, and so the city council needs to be someone who could work with the mayor and be able to negotiate with the mayor and sit down with the mayor and have a good conversation and bring back what is important in the district. So it's not what's going on in someone else's district. District councilors are responsible for their district. And so if we're looking at the big picture of where we're going and know we're going to run for Congress because Ayanna Pressley did, then I think we're missing the boat. I think this is not about power. This is about community, and that's what this role is.
Thank you all very much for joining me. Coming up, we are going to sit down with two more candidates for the Boston City Council District 8 in a continuation of the special local politics edition of Under the Radar with Callie Crossley. But for right now, this is Jennifer Nassour, Kenzie Bach, I don't know why I want to call you Mackenzie, and Helene Vincent, and we appreciate their commentary. For our viewers who are joining us on the live stream, sit tight. We'll be right back after this short break. This is the Under the Radar with Callie Crossley, and I'm Callie Crossley.